Our next speaker has is going to address a situation that is very close to home. So, in terms of bushfires, we know that we're about to hit bushfire season, and they can be quite catastrophic. And getting to a bushfire as quickly as possible is really important in terms of keeping it under control. So I'd love to introduce you to Arvind Satyam, who is the Chief Commercial Officer at PANO AI. And they're the leader in bushfires, early detection. Arvind was previously leading sales development at Cisco in the $13 billion public sector IoT and smart cities business, including engagements at Barcelona, Chicago, Copenhagen, London, Rio, and Songdo. He sits on the advisory boards of CoMotion, World Sensing and Urbanize, and is a member of the board of trustees in the New Cities Foundation. He also was selected as a World Economic Forum Young Global Leader in 2018 for his pioneering work in smart cities and innovation in sustainability, and he's a great guy. So, Arvind, we'd love to hear about how you help fight, how you have harnessed AI to help fight bushfires. Thank you.
Fantastic. Well, good morning, Annette. It's great to be here. And Annette, you and I go back a couple of years. We met in college, so I'm really excited to be part of this. So I do have a big part of my journey when it comes to wildfires is I grew up in Sydney, and I was no stranger to bushfires as I know it. And I think about last January. At that point, I was at Cisco, where I was driving a lot of their Internet of Things business. I was part of the founding team. So for 10 years, I really saw what the vision of IoT, analytics, and big data and AI could do across multiple verticals. But this was January 2020, pre-COVID. The number one story was the Australian bushfires. I happened to be at the World Economic Forum at that time, and before COVID, a lot of the discussion was around tech for good, was around climate change, and how do we, given that we all know that the world's getting hotter and that these increasing climate threats were happening, how is it possible that we could have so much of Australia burning right around us? So I was really motivated to go back and really start investigating solutions in this space, along with the CEO of Pano, Sonia, who's a dear friend of mine. And we spent the first 6 months of last year just really investigating a lot of solutions in this space. And so that was the genesis towards what we ended up creating. What I wanted to touch on, and Annette, to the point around what can analytics, big data, and AI can really bring into this, our general thesis is large fires start as small fires. And unlike many other areas, you can actually do something about this. You know, if you were to take a flood or an earthquake, you're really reporting the news. Whereas when it comes to fires, if you're able to detect an incident before it becomes a big incident, you can really coordinate resources and make a dramatic impact on that. So that was the thesis that we were really attracted to. I'd love to share with you and and the participants in terms of what we've created, what's the journey that we've been on, how analytics is a big part of this, and also just really some of the hard AI challenges that we're dealing with as it relates to this. So with that, I'll just start sharing. Are you able to see this? And yes, okay, perfect. So this was the backdrop. This was the image I think many people around the world saw, which really made me want to step back and investigate this space. What was interesting is that California has actually had many intense wildfire seasons. I'm based in San Francisco. Two of the worst wildfire seasons that we've had ever were 2018 and 2020. So clearly I'm doing something about following bushfires and wildfires wherever I live. I went from Sydney to San Francisco. What was also interesting is that it was a big change for us last year, where most of the time you thought of bushfires as something that would happen more in the rural context, but San Francisco was orange for an entire day. It was noon last September. We had to have all the lights on in the house, and you go outside, and it literally looked like you woke up on Mars. And so I think for many of us, this was a rude awakening, thinking that this isn't just something that's happening outside, this is something that's happening here, which dramatically has an impact on health and other things. From a legislature standpoint, on the back of the 2018 season, the 2020 season, there was a lot of calls for innovation at the state level, at the utility level, at the insurance level, at the community level. And really, the general backdrop is how can technology be a force multiplier? Right, living in Silicon Valley, you see lots of really cool technology. You're seeing self-driving cars. You're seeing Waymo and Tesla and others. You're seeing robots delivering pizzas. But can you do something where you take advances in AI and IoT to this problem? So that really got us to investigate this space. So the first thing that we tried to study is what are the trends and what is the problem that we're really addressing? So what we found if we started looking at the historical trends is that it wasn't necessarily that the number of wildfire incidents or bushfire incidents have dramatically increased. What has increased is the number of mega fires. And so then we started to understand, well, what is the single biggest determinant of what leads to a large incident? If you look at the Australian National University study on this, the single biggest determinant is how quickly you can get resources to that incident. And there was a lot of studies done in Australia, a number of reports in the US and Canada and other markets, and they all consistently led to that conclusion, which is the faster you can detect, the faster you can confirm and coordinate that response. And so then we started to understand the overall flow. So if you look at the Australian context, majority of the incidents are still called in. And in many of the areas which are bushfire prone, there's a heightened awareness from the community. When they see some smoke, they call in through triple O, and that goes into dispatch. But what's interesting is at that point, you can't just coordinate a response. You need to confirm that. So what a lot of fire authorities do is they send out a truck, or if it's in a really remote area, they would send out a plane, which are really limited, and they need to confirm the incident. And then they need to figure out what is the scope, the magnitude, and how do I need to coordinate that response? And then once you have that, you disseminate it, and then you coordinate the overall response. That overall process could go anywhere from minutes to hours, depending on where it is. And so that was something that we felt as though we could really make an impact on. And the way we saw that is the detection is something that we could address through a combination of cameras, satellite technology, and leveraging artificial intelligence. But once you have the detection, you can leverage the cameras to really become the ground truth. They become the visual intelligence to confirm. So you can figure out, is that an incident that is spreading very quickly and you need to call in aerial attack? Or is that just a false alarm? And maybe you just need to send a small truck out as opposed to sending two engines out. And so all of that just gives you the visual intelligence to figure out how to coordinate really scarce resources. And it's those handful of red flag days where resources are completely strapped and you need to figure out how do you allocate them in the most effective way. And so I wanted to give you first start off with what is the technology and what's behind it. So there are four elements to our solution. There is hardware, there is software which integrates the hardware video feeds, and we overlay a number of other elements like satellites and local street data to essentially create this platform. And then we have an AI engine. And then there's another step that we've introduced, which is really innovative in the industry. We have our own 24/7 staffed intelligence center. And that completes the overall four-step process. So when you're a fire authority, when you're the RFS or the CFA, and you receive an alert, you can be guaranteed that that is something that is confirmed, or that we have done our due diligence from the AI detection to send that over to you. And we also screen out false positives. So from a hardware standpoint, you're going to see that these are two ultra high definition cameras that are continuously rotating. They're doing a full 360-degree rotation per minute. And the reason why we have two is by leveraging two, you're actually being able to eliminate blind spots. And we use that through computer vision to stitch a full 360-degree panorama. Many of you may be aware of the old fire lookout towers. This is how fire detection was done historically, where you have an individual that's in a fire watchtower, and their job was to look through a binoculars and detect and then call it in. And whereas in our case, we've got these cameras spinning, stitching the imagery continuously, and we have our AI being applied to that. So I'll just play this to give you an idea. And these are mounted on top of cell towers, could be on top of fire watch towers, municipal comms towers, could be on top of wineries. What you're seeing in the backdrop here is Napa and Sonoma County. In this scenario where they've had devastating wildfires the last 3 to 4 years running, and as somebody that lives very local to this, that's an industry that has had a dramatic impact to their day-to-day business, where they've had to throw out grapes in many of the wineries the last couple of seasons because of just smoke impact to their production. So this has made a huge impact, and we're working very closely with the fire authorities in the community here. Now, once you have this, this also allows you to get the 360-degree view. But just to step back a little bit and tell you a little bit about our journey. So I mentioned the initial impetus was looking at the Australian bushfires. We incorporated the company in August, went through 2 rounds of fundraising. Happy to report that within 18 months, less than 18 months, we've been able to deploy paid commercial engagements in 4 states. So we're up in California, Colorado, Oregon, as well as Montana. Now, I know all of you are wondering that there is no Australian state there, but I will tell you we are working on that. And if you have suggestions, would love to hear from you. I've got my details towards the end of this. But we've just been really excited to work with the different stakeholders. And in addition to the fire authorities, we're working very closely with utilities. And I know in Australia, with the likes of Ausgrid and Energy Australia and others, the impact to power when there's bushfires is also something that has a huge impact on the community and the industry around it. And we're actually doing something very specific with utilities, and we're also working on something very specific with the insurance industry. So just to build on top of that, one of the things that is unique and innovative to what we're doing is we actually create a full 360-degree panorama. And I'm just going to pull up one of our live feeds just to give you an idea of how this looks. So these are some of our stations, and it's a pretty cloudy day in Northern California, but it seems to be sunny down in Malibu. So I'm just going to show you our Malibu feed here. This is a 360-degree panorama. We're using pixelation, which is also a key part of this. Our objective here is to just focus on detecting wildfires and smoke, not private property. So this is something that we pixelate. And what you're seeing here is we're actually not taking control of the camera. We're using computer vision to stitch these, and these images are getting constantly refreshed. And you can also look at historical imagery. And the other thing that we do is we ensure that you don't need to look at the imagery all the time. We're actually notifying you when there is incidents. And right now, it's our winter season, so it's just started, and there's a lot of rain. And so this is a good time for prescribed burning. And that's the reason why you're seeing a lot of prescribed burns. But let me show you what it looks like when it's an incident that we actually pick up through our AI. So this is an incident over in Napa and Sonoma County, and this would be what it would look like. Let me just refresh this one time. I think I'm relying on my internet connection here. I know I'm in San Francisco, but it seems to be a little bit slow. I will come back to that. Now, actually, this will illustrate that. So once you have the 360, the next part of it is how do you leverage AI to detect smoke? And so right now our AI model has been trained with over 350 million images. And if you start to look at this, these detections go from easier to hard. So these are faint whiffs of smoke. This is a cloudy day, much harder to detect smoke when there's fog and cloud all around you. And so that was something where we've spent a lot of time really trying to study how does smoke behave relative to clouds, fog, the marine layer in Northern California. And that's also the reason why we prioritize doing states in different environmental conditions. I can tell you we're detecting smoke that is nestled between mountains covered with snow. And you can still have wildfire incidents when there's snow covering the mountains. And so the AI is just learning from different environments. And what we've also found is that Oregon and the environment there is going to be very different, very foggy, a lot greener to say Southern California, drier. What you're seeing here is Napa and Sonoma County versus say Montana or Aspen. And our intention is just to learn and learn through the AI and to essentially feed the model as we scale this across multiple states in the US as well as across multiple countries like Australia, Canada, and parts of Western Europe. Now, I want to take you through an incident that we notified the authorities on. Right now, the AI model is able to detect 70% of the incidents within the first 5 minutes. Many of these incidents are detected within the first couple of minutes, and they get progressively harder. And what I'm going to play here is a fairly challenging incident, which we were able to notify around the time that the fire started and was called in. And you're just seeing some detections which our model uses to confirm the incident. And we use our own labelers to feed this, and we've got historical data sets, and then we also use live video from our own deployments to just get better and better. And what I hope is within the not too distant future, we are going to have some stations deployed in Australia so that we can really start training the model with the Australian terrain. I'll just continue talking while this loads. The next part of the equation that we wanted to make sure was once you have detections, and we've been able to detect a lot of AI alerts very quickly, but the next thing that we also wanted to do was make sure that we eliminate false positives. And the way we stop screen sharing. The way we eliminate false positives is by making sure that the intelligence center is able to get notified of all the incidents as soon as they get picked up through AI. They're able to get notified of the incident. They've got the ability to rewind the clock to essentially pull up the video feed and then start to eliminate false positives. And good examples of false positives, we've seen a lot of dust clouds. So, for instance, you can have hills where you've got a tractor coming down it, and to the naked eye, it would look like smoke. And to the AI, if it's just a dust cloud, it would appear as smoke. But what we're doing in those situations is applying context. And I think when it comes down to analytics and really being able to apply AI, context is something that is really important. And so in that case, our analysts understand that that is a farm or they're able to see that that was a tractor that was in that area recently. And then what they do is then they realize that that is an incident that is not a false positive. Or other things that we've picked up. I didn't know what this incident is. It's called a water dog. Growing up in Australia, we don't really have hot dogs, as many of you guys know. So I thought water dog was just a really interesting variation of a hot dog, but it's really a cloud formation that happens in the mountain areas, and a lot of the fire authorities get calls about them, and they still need to go send out trucks and engines, but they realize these are false alarms. And so, in the case of Aspen, in the case of Montana, what the fire authorities are doing when they get these calls, they monitor leveraging the cameras. And then what they do is they realize that this is not an incident. And right now, for this fire season, they're just really trying to understand the incident and figure out that that is a false positive. And but for the purpose of this one, they want to err on side of caution and still send out a truck. But I think over time they're going to get sharper and sharper in that response, and make sure that they're able to just optimize the resources as part of that process. And so this is where the intelligence center is really playing a key role in minimizing false positives. The next thing that we're also doing is understanding context of the location. So we've heard from many fire authorities that a 50-acre fire can vary. So not all 50-acre fires are the same. A 50-acre fire that happens to be near Katoomba, where it's coming into the urban boundary, is going to be very different than something that may be really far out in Goulburn, which is away from the urban boundary. Um, and so the other thing that we're trying to apply to this is start to overlay context of the urban boundary, but also overlay utility lines. Also, working with insurance companies, try and have an appreciation for where their insured assets are. And that's something that we've been trying to really try and understand, which is how do you then apply that visual intelligence to then inform authorities that this incident is one that is critical, that is spreading quickly, and it is very close to the urban boundary. And so giving that type of visual intelligence really helps them understand how do you coordinate that response faster than you may have done otherwise. Um, the next thing, as it relates to utilities, we've been working very closely with utilities. You may be aware in the case of California, some of the utilities locally have had very large bankruptcies like PG&E, and they're investing billions around wildfire mitigation as well as vegetation management and system hardening. This happens to be one of their major priorities as an organization. And so what they're really interested in understanding is, tell me when an incident has started. So as soon as you see smoke, notify, but also, can I understand where the incident is relative to my assets? And then if I have resources in the area, can you help coordinate them? So that's kind of the operational flow. So you go from detection to notification, but now applying with more data context, and then context to the individual stakeholders' environment. And then you can start overlaying response and risk. And then the other things that we're also working on is we started looking at the continuum of the overall fire life cycle. There is pre-fire, there is active fire, there is post-fire, and in that type of, and then there's early fire. So if you look at the pre-fire, when you know it's a red flag day, you can leverage the cameras to start monitoring fuel conditions. You can start looking at brush. You can start looking at how dry it is to say when there's dry lightning and there's a lot of winds, that is an area that can really kick off very quickly. Whereas when it's early fire, you get notified, and in our case, you're able to get visual intelligence. You will be notified through text or email. You'll also be able to get triangulation, which is a key part of our analysis. We're able to leverage two stations that are in a given area to then overlay triangulation to figure out where is the incident relative to other assets? And then after that, the other thing that you can also do is start looking at active fire monitoring. So you can start monitoring the spread of this incident. You can start looking at time lapses. When did it start? The first hour, second hour. We essentially do a 24-hour time lapse. And then post fire, you've got the ability to pull up the incident and actually start looking at how did the incident start? How did it spread? And whether you're an insurance company, whether you're a utility, whether you're a fire authority, you've got the ability to then start doing post-fire investigation. Now, the next thing that I want to pull up, and I'm just trying to get the presentation back up, which it is. Bear with me. Is the other thing that we also did is provide notifications to our stakeholders on we've then provided notifications to our stakeholders on active incidents. So this way, you're able to get text and email alerts as soon as an incident comes up. Our intelligence center keeps informing them of active incidents and how they're progressing. And this is what I was referring to when it comes to triangulation, being able to leverage multiple stations to actually pinpoint where it is. And in this particular instance, this was a fire that I shared earlier. It was picked up from one of our camera locations, which was 12 miles away, another one which was 21 miles away, and we were able to triangulate it within 0.13 miles, so roughly 200 meters, give or take, from that distance. And if you are a fire authority and you got roughly that type of bearing, it saves a lot of precious time in terms of being able to drive to that incident. The next thing that I also wanted to highlight was how does this play out in a wildfire environment where there's not a lot of people? So this is a good example. This happened in Montana about a month and a bit ago. This was an incident that was picked up by one of our stations that was 13 miles out. It was a wildfire that was spreading very quickly. What was interesting was it was called in by a hunter that happened to be next to a hunting lodge. And this is an area with less than 4,000 people. And these are incidents that historically people would not have called them in unless it started coming much closer to the urban boundary. So in this particular scenario, if it weren't for this individual that called it in, this would have spread very quickly. In our case, we actually picked up the incident leveraging AI around the same time as the 911 call. But the big difference here is we provided visual intelligence to that incident. So they were able to then call an aerial attack and coordinate a response and really size that and dramatically change the impact of this incident. So this was contained to roughly 74 acres within the first 24 hours. And the visual intelligence really played a big role in doing this. And just to give you an idea of kind of the future landscape of what we're working on, we're also working on overlaying a lot of utility asset information. So now not only can you see where the incident has started, but you can see where the incident is relative to utility assets, relative to insurance assets, and then you can be notified that's where the incident is and it's about to start. It's that's where it started and it's spreading quickly and it is 2.1 miles away from a critical asset like a data center, a substation, etc. So as you look at that continuum of being getting early fire and then notification, confirmation, dissemination, as well as addressing risk, we believe these are the key steps that you can leverage analytics, AI to really improve the response. So with that, I would love to take questions. As I mentioned, the big absence is there's no deployment in Australia, but would love to speak to any of you that may have interest. And I'm going to stop sharing, and Annette, I'll come back to you.
Hey, that's amazing. And
Thank you.
some of the comments are, "That's amazing." So it is shared. But we do have some questions, and I'm going to start with audience questions first. Is there
Great.
any space for alerting people nearby on active incidents?
Sure. So great question. As soon as there is an incident and we pick it up through AI and we validate it through our intelligence center, we actually share a link which can be accessed by anybody. And that is something that we are putting up on our Twitter feed. We give that to fire authorities. And what's interesting is that you can actually pull up the live panorama view of the incident. I know, for instance, last year we have a little one. My wife and I and our 1 year old at that time spent some time in Napa and Sonoma County during our lockdown, uh, but it was just surrounded by fires. And so it was hardly a vacation when you're trying to look at that. And so I'm frantically trying to look at Twitter and I'm frantically trying to follow the news leads. But if somebody gave me the ability to look at the camera and know that that's the incident and you know where it is on a map and you have that peace of mind, absolutely. The other thing that we're also doing is just to build on top of that, there's many homeowners that have asked us, hey, we would love to get access to more of this in communities. So there are things that we're working on. That's, yeah,
Okay, awesome. Okay, so the other question is around surveillance. Um, it requires lots of vision infrastructure, cameras, etc., poles installed across large geographic regions. Did the founders and team have a hard time navigating this process? Did infrastructure need to be installed in order to get training data? Oh, lovely question.
sure. Yeah, it's a great question. So one of the things that we learned is that we do a lot of analysis to try and understand what are the optimal locations. So at a high level, you want to be on locations that overlook high fire risk areas. If you happen to be on it, you're going to burn. So you want to look down on areas where you have that. Now, there are some players that looked at putting up their own towers, but in our view, there are many locations that are already equipped with the right type of infrastructure to do this. So, good examples of these old fire watch towers, many of which are no longer staffed because it's not safe or it's not that interesting for people to drive 3 to 4 hours and then spend a whole week there, right? And nor is it really giving you a 24/7 view. So, we are in discussion with some of those players that are really looking to equip cameras to essentially be that additional eyes. Other locations, we've found that water tanks, we've found commercial property that overlooks high vantage points. These all have it. The things that we need are power, backup, as well as connectivity. And the power use that we have, frankly, is minimal. It's the same as what you would need to power your MacBook Pro. And the cameras are running, they're powered over Ethernet. And so that part's pretty easy. But the other thing that we had to solve for is in areas where you do have the fires, the power could go down. So we want to make sure that we have backup for at least a week or so that you're able to get this footage. So we're able to solve for that either through backup generators, and in areas where there's zero power, we've also deployed solar to go solve for that.
Awesome. Awesome. Fantastic. Now, so we mentioned then training data, and you had a huge number of images that you trained the. How difficult is it to be able to distinguish between smoke, haze, fog, just cloud even? I mean, how difficult was that job, and,
Sure.
you know, the training that was required?
Yeah. I would say it is a really difficult challenge. On a very simple level, the AI sees what we see, right? And so now the AI is getting better and better. So we've been able to train it with historical data as well as our own live data. So roughly about 350 million images, where what you're doing is you're labeling, so you're able to essentially say hot dog or not a hot dog, if you've seen that Silicon Valley show, right? And but where it gets really tricky is you've got fog, you've got the marine layer, and then you've got a faint wisp of smoke. What's easy is when it's a clear blue day and you've got dark smoke and that's moving. Where it gets very challenging is when it's a low visibility day, just like when we go out skiing and when the conditions are flat light, it is pretty hard to see what the terrain is like. And in this
Mm.
context, um, the AI is really looking for texture and movement. So smoke behaves differently than clouds and fog. And but the other thing that's really interesting, if you look at these camera views in August and September in California, in Northern California, pretty much all of them were covered by a dense layer of smoke. So now you're seeing smoke on top of smoke. But
Mm.
there is smoke that is sitting on the horizon, and then there is smoke that's coming out of an incident. And so that's where you train the AI to start looking at texture, movement, gradient, all of these other signals to essentially eliminate this. And so I would say it is a hard job, but as you start adding more data, and then you start layering on the intelligence center to then validate. And then we also use the intelligence center to essentially have that false positive loop. So if we find that the AI picks up something that is not an incident, then you go back and say that's not an incident. So the data set then improves as part of that.
Okay, awesome, awesome. And you talked about images, the different images that you've used. Does the where the images come from, like in terms of terrain and things like that? So, Australian bush is very different to almost everywhere else in the world. So, how important is having a local training set as well as the smoke sort of movement type data set?
Sure, absolutely, and I think it's really important. If I think about the Australian terrain, the way we have a lot of eucalyptus, we have a lot of different environments that really turn out to not only the terrain, but the types of fires and the fuel conditions. And so all of these, and then you've also got the visual landscapes. I can tell you when we deployed in Aspen and we started moving towards fall, all of a sudden you started seeing the leaves change color. And we knew that, but in Northern California, you don't have as much of that foliage change as you do in the mountain areas or in the Northwest, in the Pacific Northwest, or in the Northeast of the US. And so what it meant is that the AI is now trying to look at smoke and fire incidents where the leaves are orange and red. And it's a different type of area. But soon after, it starts to get better. Now, the other thing that we ran into is snow. Now, I can imagine in areas like Jindabyne and Threadbow and Blue Cow and other areas where in summer you could have fires, but in around that autumn, springtime frame, especially what we're seeing in these mountain areas, autumn is an area where they've had a lot of incidents because the leaves dry out. There's a lot of fuel on the ground, especially in the afternoon. And if there is incidents that start, they really start becoming major incidents. Colorado's had some big incidents around Aspen in the October, November timeframe. But if you look at it from a naked eye, you think, well, there's snow. I mean, surely there's no fires. But that's not the case. So, and that's where the AI just needs to really understand the environment. And so, what we're really focused on is detecting smoke as quickly as possible and then applying all of those other analytics to the different end users. But can we detect smoke in as many challenging environments and as quickly as possible and as accurately as possible?
Awesome, awesome. That's fantastic. How big is your analytics team?
So from an overall analytics team, the overall company is over 20 individuals now. The analytics team, I would say, let's say roughly over 10, but it's a lot of different individuals because some of this is outsourced. If you think about input data, so the way I would segment it is there is the input data, which is all the data sets that you use to train the model. There is the the intelligence center itself, which I would say much larger. So in fact, let's just say the numbers are much larger than that. A bunch of this is outsourced. And then there is all the analysis that gets done in building out the AI. And then there is the AI itself, which is essentially doing the detection. But then how do you make the AI usable, which is really feeding that into the software platform? So we have folks that are really working on integrating that, overlaying maps, and then really building out the specific functionality for a fire authority to a utility to insurance customers. So across the board, it is a huge part of our overall value proposition.
Yeah, look, analytics and data, they're the linchpin to any kind of data business. If you don't have a good
Absolutely.
analytics team, you're not making full use of your data. So my last question is, because we've got about 3 minutes left in your session. So if anyone else has a question, please pop it into the Q&A right now. Have you had any, and I don't want it, it's sort of bad to call spotting a fire a success, but have you had any successes or notable successes where someone out of Colorado or wherever you've got these pilot implementations where they've been sort of surprised at how accurate it is, or surprised at the results that they've
Yeah.
got?
Absolutely. So one of the incidents that I shared with you was the Shedhorn incident in Big Sky, Montana. What was really funny about that is we deployed and I was going to go there to present at a media day 2 days later, and the incident was on the weekend. It was almost as though we timed it, but I promise we didn't. But in that particular scenario, they were really impressed with a couple of things. How quickly the AI was able to detect it, because if it weren't for the hunter, and it's bow hunting season, and so there's a lot of people out, but normally there isn't. And so they told us that this would have taken a lot longer, and we detected, notified around the same time that the call came in. But more importantly, the visual intelligence, and something else that I didn't share, but the optical zoom from 13 miles away, you could literally see the flames and you could see the way it was moving. And
Wow.
that, for a wildland firefighter, is hugely important because you've got your lives at risk, you're coordinating, you have more visual intelligence to determine the type of attack that you need to contain that. And I've seen a bunch of videos around the Australian bushfires. There was one documentary I saw around Malakuta where the flames just really inflamed. And I think the more you can get that type of data sooner, I think safety is also a big element of this. Something else that people have been really impressed with is triangulation in many of the incidents, because a lot of time is lost in being able to
Mm.
spot this. And so we've been told where people have looked at the incidents and they said, your ability to triangulate, and it varies, right? So if you have cross bearings, you can be very accurate. If you're much closer together, it gets a little bit trickier. But in general, the fact that it is done not manually, directly integrated into the system, and then you can then overlay utility assets and other property boundaries. That's been a really important addition. And then the last thing that I would say is just we've shared with our end users the detections that we're seeing in really faint areas, which they've been really impressed with.
Awesome. Awesome. It's a great thing. Do you think that the US is more willing to take up innovative tech than Australia? There's a loaded question for you.
There is not based on what I read of the Royal Commission report. So I'm hoping you guys can do something about it. It's not the reason why I moved to Silicon Valley 15 years ago. I think really if I as a proud Aussie, I think to me, the two countries that are really at the forefront of this are Australia and the US. I think both have seen just ridiculous fire seasons recently, and I think there's general awareness. And if you look at the Royal Commission report that came out last year, there's a lot of speak about how technology can be the force multiplier, how data and early attack strategies with satellites, AI, cameras can really make an impact. And so I'm really optimistic that Australia, US will really lead the way. And I think it's going to happen. I think it's, as you guys probably know, with adoption and public sector, things take time, but I'm really excited, and we as a company are really excited about Australia.
Awesome. I can't wait for your first pilot to run in Australia. That will be a lovely day. So, thank
Thank
you
you.
so much for spending some time with us. That is an amazing thing that you're doing, and absolutely analytics goodness. So, thank you so much for joining us, and it's good to see you again.
Likewise, my pleasure, and enjoy the rest of the conference. I saw the earlier sessions. Annette, thank you very much. Take care.
Not a problem. Thanks, Arvin. Bye.